Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you, and good evening and welcome to JCU's Bebegu Yumba campus, and especially welcome to those joining us online this evening for this inaugural Rick Speare Oration. It's my privilege to introduce our very familiar guest speaker to you all on behalf of the Dean of the College of Public Health, Medical and Veterinary Sciences, Professor Ted Whittam, who is regrettably unable to join us this evening. I spoke to Ted earlier this week and he definitely did not sound well. So it's a pleasure for me to be here in his stead. Before I say any more, I'd like to invite Professor Gracelyn Smallwood, AM, to give the welcome to country. Welcome, Gracelyn.
Thanks very much, Vice-Chancellor and Professor Wronski and all my colleagues here. I'm regarded as my family. Someone said it's the Elders Club. I said, speak for yourself. I'd like to say Wadamuli in my Birragubba language. As one of the elders and traditional owners here, I need no introduction. It's a very emotional occasion tonight, and I'm sure our new Vice-Chancellor would have heard about this amazing man. And I'd like to sincerely thank the Public Health, Medicine and Vet Sciences, Professor Ted Whittam, who we've just spoken about, and Professor Sue Devine. The wonderful Kerry is here, beautiful Toby's and Alice Springs online, Luke, who I thought was Rick walking in at one stage, and beautiful granddaughter Georgina. And I've known Dr. Rick Spears and beautiful Kerry, his wife. I was a junior nurse in 1967 at the Townsville Hospital. And Rick used to walk around the wards with long black hair. And all these nurses would actually go crazy for him, Kerry. And I'd have a little chuckle because they were so busy. And they said, he should be playing in a rock band. And I've remained friends of this amazing family since all of those years, and lived opposite Rick and Kerry, and I've got this phobia about frogs. I have no idea why, and yet I can chase Death Adders and all sorts of crazy snakes, and I'm sure Dr. Wronski will tell you about that. But Rick was in charge of the Anton Brinell Centre 29 years ago when I was working there and trying to do a master's, and he said, look, I'm getting tired of being an administrator. I used to tell him he had a brain better than Einstein, and he had this beautiful woman in the background, Kerry. I said, behind every strong man, there's always, every successful man, there's always a beautiful, strong partner, and that's what you are, Kerry, and your lovely family. And as we went on our journey, Rick said, look, I need to step down, but I want to make sure I've got a real good replacement. He said, I've been hearing about this Professor Wronski. I said, oh, yeah? He said, and they said, you know everything. What's he like? I said, oh, he's okay. He does a lot of bush nursing. And I met him over there at Nookumbar and he got me locked up. And I was working for all true stories. I was working for the nursing emergency nursing services way back then in the 80s, and certain directors of nursing, they had the opportunity to take me, and some of the matrons said, God, we can't take that crazy woman, she's an activist. And that was under the Charlie Court government, and I'd had most of my upbringing under the Bjelke-Petersen government. I'm nearly finished, Vice-Chancellor. And this is all in my book. And I got locked up, and when the Premier found out that I was working, he was paying my wages and he wanted me sacked. But the Broome Medical Service wrote a lovely letter and got me out, and then I started travelling, and then Professor Wronski then took Rick's job. And I said they were both photo finished, they're both workaholics, and I love them both very much, and Rick's family. And one Christmas, nearly finished, one Christmas, my granddaughter or my niece had this beautiful little puppy dog and had 5 puppies. Kerry, you'll remember this. And we couldn't get the little puppies out. I said, don't worry, I'm a really highly qualified midwife. And the little puppy was stuck, and I actually pulled the head off. It was the most horrifying story I'd ever done with my 55 years of midwifery. And I grabbed the bloody dog and we went over to Kerry's, and Kerry was just about to serve Christmas dinner up. And I'm sobbing my eyes out because I pulled the head off in front of the grandchildren. And Rick casually walks out, it's okay, go and get me some soap out of the kitchen, that green soap. What is he doing? I'm thinking about the maternity section, going to do an episiotomy. And he just put it in and delivered the babies. But Kerry was not phased. And I'm talking about this amazing family. And Rick then was in charge of the bridging of Indigenous research capacity. And I was one of those students, and Dr. Jenny Judd and Ricky was my supervisor for my master's and PhD with the help of Professor Wronski and his beautiful wife, Maggie Grant. So many fond memories of these gorgeous people, and we'll never forget them. And I'm sure we're all going to meet in the dream time. So what an honour it is to have this oration to our beautiful friend who each and every one of us loved and cherished. And while I've seen Ricky's son tonight, I thought, God, he'll never be gone, because I actually thought he was a clone. And we're all going to meet again. Thank you, Vice-Chancellor, for giving me this honour, and I hope that every year we'll pay homage to my beautiful friend, Dr. Rick Speare. God bless you.
Thank you, Gracelyn, for that outstanding welcome. The Bindal people, as you all know, generously gifted the campus name Bebegu Yamba, meaning place of learning, in the Biri Gubba language during the 50th anniversary celebrations of JCU in 2020. I pay my respects to your elders, past, present, and emerging, and also to those of the neighbouring Walgarukaba people. And I extend that respect to JCU's distinguished Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, graduates, and staff. Of course, we have many distinguished guests, staff, and students joining us here this evening for this inaugural Rick Speare Oration, including, I believe, some of our very first students of the postgraduate veterinary program established by Professor Rod Campbell in 1969. I too especially wish to welcome Professor Speare's wife, Dr. Kerry Kelly, and 3 of their 5 children who are able to be here with us tonight. As you know, Emeritus Professor Rick Speare AM joined the university in 1988 and was the director of the JCU School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine from 2009 to 2012, including teaching in the Masters of Public Health program. He retired from the university in 2012 and was then made a member of the Order of Australia in the same year, and remained an active emeritus professor, continuing to teach, research, and mentor. Indeed, it was during his travel to the Cairns campus to teach in 2016 that he was sadly involved in a car accident from which he tragically passed away. Professor Rick Speare was obviously a dear friend, valued and respected colleague to so many at JCU, and his loss was keenly felt across the university, both with staff, students, as well as alumni. As both a veterinarian and a medical doctor, he was a passionate advocate for improving health in the tropics, undertaking applied research to generate evidence for decisions and building research capacity amongst local researchers. He is best known for his research on amphibian diseases, parasitic nematode worms, lyssavirus, and of course, head lice. In recognition of his work in international veterinary science, Emeritus Professor Rick Speare AM was posthumously awarded the Kesteven Medal by the Australian Veterinary Association, recognising his distinguished contributions to international veterinary science in the fields of technical and scientific assistance to developing countries. The Australasian College of Tropical Medicine Prize awarded to the graduating student in the Master of Public Health and Tropical Medicine, who has demonstrated the best overall performance, was renamed the Rick Speare Medal in 2018. Professor Speare built and enhanced the research profile of the college, particularly in One Health, an integrated unifying approach to balance and optimize the health of people, animals, and the environment. And it is in recognition of his significant contribution to this field of research and to the college that they have introduced a perpetual series of research seminars open to the public and the university community with a focus on One Health research. And each oration will feature an external speaker of renown for One Health. Although I'm not sure our inaugural speaker could truly be considered as external, Emeritus Professor Ian Wronski, AO, of course, has a very long history with JCU. And that history is still being written. Indeed, despite retiring from his role as a Deputy Vice Chancellor of the Division of Tropical Health and Medicine in late 2020, I can confidently say I've seen more of Ian since I commenced as the Vice Chancellor in February than many of my currently employed professoriate. He is, as you all know, a persistent, dogged, and determined presence on the interests of rural, remote, tropical, public, and Indigenous health. And for this, he was awarded an Officer of the Order of Australia in 2014. He is a Life Fellow of the Australian College of Rural and Remote Medicine, and amongst a number of ongoing engagements with the university and the health sector, is currently chair of the Tropical Australian Academic Health Centre. It gives me great pleasure to invite Emeritus Professor Ian Wronski, AO, to deliver the inaugural Rick Speare Oration. Ian.
Thanks, Vice Chancellor and Gracelyn. I was wondering who the audience was going to be. But it is a real honour to be invited to kick off this series of orations. I do need to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Woolgooragabba and Bindal people, elders past and present. I also want to acknowledge Gracelyn Smallwood and her family, who made my family and the move to Townsville so comfortable. Moving here from the Kimberley wasn't welcomed by everyone in North Queensland. And so Gracelyn's efforts accomplishing that was very important for us all. And let us get on with what we had come here to do. So thank you. And I don't think it was entirely my fault that Gracelyn ended up at jail in Nookumba. The world lost the force for good when Rick Speare died in a car accident on the Atherton Tableland in 2016, of course on his way to teach parasitology in Cairns. Trained as both a medical doctor, a vet with a PhD in parasitology, as well as being a card-carrying public health physician, Rick was in many ways our research life sciences generalist, with deep interests across a range of species. He made important contributions in research, ranging from wildlife, parasites and their hosts, through to the health of human populations. His unusual capacity to think across species brought real originality to his work. He was upbeat and believed deeply that the research findings should make a difference. As Simon has said, he was appointed as a member of the Order of Australia in 2012. In Townsville, Rick had long-standing connections with the Indigenous people, and that was evident from the warmth of the reception he received in their company. That's very relevant to how Rick and I first met. Just noting that the next few images have deceased people in them. So it was 1991, and Rick was working on a research and evaluation project for the Townsville Aboriginal and Islander Health Service. He was visiting the Kimberley to explore the functioning of the organisation I worked for, the Kimberley Aboriginal Medical Services Council, where I was Director of Health Services. It's an umbrella council of all the community-controlled Aboriginal health services and aspiring health services across the Kimberley wide. Its main functions were governance, policy development, public health, health promotion, health IT, Aboriginal health worker, training and other cross-regional activities. The underlying issue really was how and whether these models might be applied in North Queensland. So, while driving between Halls Creek and Kununurra in the East Kimberley, after attending a Camps Council meeting, Rick popped the question. In those days, it was a pretty narrow highway in the East Kimberley, and Rick clearly found that stressful. My speed might also have had something to do with it, but I was used to travelling 1,000 kilometres a day. Out of the blue, he says, "Why don't you come and work for us at the Anton Brinell Centre at James Cook University?" Well, to be honest, I'd never really heard of James Cook University, and I wasn't really clear where Townsville was. He then says, "You can be director." I was pretty surprised and said, "Isn't that your job?" He replied with his sort of funny laugh, "Yeah, but I hate it. I want to get back to research." So over a period of 18 months or so, interspersed with several visits to Townsville and lots of discussions, in August 1992, I came across to work at the Anton Brinell Centre at JCU as director, with my family following a few weeks later. So that's how Rick and I developed our relationship, and how I got to have the pleasure, well, mostly, of working very closely with this incredible person. It was the right time for us to move from the Kimberley, where we'd been for quite a long time, interspersed with some overseas postgraduate study stuff. The kids were reaching 9 and 5 years of age, and we were worried about the educational opportunities for them in the Kimberley. Yes, well, I have to go back. There we go. Yeah. So here we were, working in the Anton Brinell Centre building at the old Townsville General Hospital site in North Ward. The ABC, which is what I'm going to call it, was housed in the original building that housed the original Australian Institute of Tropical Medicine that was built in 1912. The Australian Institute of Tropical Medicine, the 1912 one, was one of a string of institutes established by the British from the 1890s onwards. The French equivalents were called the Pasteur Institutes, and a lot of Latin America have called their institutes the Pasteur Institutes too. The AITM was Australia's first independent medical research institute, opening several months before Walter and Eliza Hall. But that was moved to University of Sydney in 1930. It was named after Anton Brinell, who was the first director and came from the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, where he was head of the Runcorn Laboratories. Walter and Eliza Hall were central to quite a lot of research funding in Australia in those years. The Halls were Central and North Queensland pastoralists. They had offered their funds to the Queensland government to establish a research institute, but the government declined because they didn't want riffraff like that around here. So it went to Melbourne and is the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute. So both the first two medical institutes in Australia, independent ones, were funded by Queensland families. Following the Kerr-White review of public health in Australia in the mid-1980s, and supported by a groundswell from Townsville medical community's agitation. The Tropical Health Surveillance Unit was ultimately established at JCU in 1987, and this became the Anton Breinel Centre for Tropical Health and Medicine in 1990, and then named after its first director, Anton Breinel. The work atmosphere at the ABC was welcoming, collegiate, and industrious. My kids and Rick's kids would come together at the ABC and rampage around the place after school or childcare, and were known amongst some of the staff as the Anton Breinel orphans because their parents were always there. I remember the occasion when a pheasant cuckoo had knocked itself out somehow, flying into a tree at my place up at the foot of Castle Hill, which is pretty close by. Rick was really excited and sort of rushed to check it out. My kid's impression was that he was a vet and was worried about its welfare. Actually, it turned out that pheasant cuckoos sometimes have a very rare strongyloides variety, and that was really of great interest. On another occasion, Rick drove up to the Anton Breinel front entrance in his vehicle, which was a ute, I recall, with a passenger strapped in the passenger seat, expecting that it was one of Rick's kids. My kids ran out to see who it was, expecting, you know. Actually, Rick had strapped a dead koala into the front seat, and that became quite a discussion point at several places, several dinner tables for a while. The work environment at the centre was vibrant, a bit quirky, but under financial pressure. There was significant pressure from competitor universities, and some parts of government were listening. Do you need to do tropical health in the tropics? Wouldn't it be better to do it in the capital city? Hasn't gone away, I'm afraid. I still remember the discussion, particularly with Rick and Peter Leggett, about what and where was our competitive advantage going to be. What was the ABC going to be famous for? And what were the needs needing addressing in Northern Australia, our near neighbours, and the tropics more generally? We tossed around population health, rural, remote, Indigenous health, and their training needs in our part of the world, and settled on bringing together the fields of public health and tropical medicine as a new construct. It would be the foundation of our activity from then on. I remember Peter pointing out in a very Peter way that that was a globally distinctive concept, and only one other university in the world used it in a master's program, and that was Tulane in New Orleans. So who else other than Peter would have had that information at their fingertips? So public health and tropical medicine was born. I remember the discussion between mostly the three of us about target markets. We really did get down to this, and we decided on targeting mid-career, mostly health professionals who are at least 4 years out and worked in Northern Australia or overseas. There would be a main program called the Master of Public Health and Tropical Medicine, a postgrad dip, and a diploma for those without the required prerequisites. The program would be mostly based on residential teaching blocks of 2 weeks. The logic being that these students would be senior enough to be able to get 2 weeks away from work, quite often with their employer paying airfares. But they were too senior to be able to relocate to Townsville and take a year or two off to do a master's degree. It was the model I'd seen work quite well at the Kennedy School of Government in Boston in the United States, and they did it for military generals. And it struck me that really the issues around the dispersion of lots of skilled medicos and nurses around the world in difficult locations, a block mode program like that for the generals could work. So then began the frantic curriculum writing. Rick's job was to cover the subjects of infectious disease tropical medicine, and parasitology, co-teaching with others. Peter took on at least tropical medicine, travel medicine, tropical public health, and probably some more. The block program meant you could fly expertise in when required, and you didn't have to employ everyone. It also lent itself to teaching away from base, which we did in the Kimberley and East Arnhem Land. American colleagues in Boston, generously provided us with the curricula for epidemiology and biostatistics. And the late Mark Roberts, who many of you will remember, a professor of management at Harvard University, came out every year for 7 years to teach management pretty much without cost, other than airfares. It was pretty amazing support. The response was incredible. By the way, people who are looking at this person here, that's Jacinta Alston when she's 22. The response was incredible. Yeah, Professor Jacinta Alston, PVC Indigenous at Monash. So the response was incredible. The public health and tropical medicine training program grew like Billy-O. You could hardly believe it. Within the first year, there were 68 enrolments. I still remember the number. Then it was 128. Then it was 180. And then so on, year on year. I'm not entirely sure, but in about 15 years, it reached 700, something like that. 40% were medicos, 40% were nurses, and 20% were others like environmental health personnel, managers and the like. There was a very significant enrolment from Indigenous students from all over the country, and a heck of a lot came from WA. Within a decade, it was the second largest public health program in Australia, second only to Sydney University, which had 1,400 people enrolled. So the success of the project gave us great confidence and a willingness to back our judgment and plans, which were actually quite grand. We formed an alliance with Médecins Sans Frontières to teach refugee health blocks, of which this is one. And that was very successful. We gave them free places in the program for them providing lecturers. In fact, during the COVID-19 outbreak, our alumni, most of whom had done the refugee health program, were senior decision makers in state governments in at least 5 states. Well, 4 states and 1 territory. It's not bad. Most of them had worked for MSF or similar organisations after doing these programs. We were quite surprised that we were pretty good at this stuff. And we started thinking about a rollout of other more clinical disciplines, including a medical program. We were also developing our concepts around what our more clinical niche might be, and came up with just linking the words rural health, remote health, Indigenous health, and tropical health. And so emerged RIT, R-R-I-T. Now, it was an acronym no one really knew. 10 years later, curriculum are written around it. You can go to international conferences where there's RIT sessions. And so it's another construct that just was applied at the right time. Reductionism in science, including medical science, has been a very powerful historical force. And the developments of biomedicine, molecular biology, and genetics, for example, have been really massive. The tricky bit is that along with the vertical specialisation that's evolved, knowing more and more about smaller and smaller slithers of physical things, we haven't developed the horizontal specialisations so successfully. So commonly, there is a loss of an awareness of what is occurring in other silos, and a capacity to communicate and understand subject matters across silos often traps us. And so it is with human biology, animal biology, and ecosystem biology and wildlife. One Health is a concept that tries to bring together our understandings of the links between wildlife ecosystems, animal life, and humans. One of Rick's great strengths was the way he could think across those disciplines in a way few people can. Organisationally, One Health thinking has been hard to implement, certainly in developed economies. Rick was cautious about the One Health playbook, believing that it hadn't been turned into practical efforts by government or multilateral agencies yet. He coined the term clinical One Health to try to improve the concept's application within the wider veterinary and health communities. An interesting parallel exists in the thinking about health and medical workforce. Whilst reductionism in medical science has resulted in massive gains in knowledge, a consequence has been the evolution of workforce models that involve ultra-specialisation. So that's very positive in many ways. It is often built into the designs of our health system, but works best in areas of large populations and big hospitals where practitioners can more easily refer across silos to another subspecialty. The problem being that subspecialist-based health knowledge is inadequate for medical and health workforce functioning in areas of workforce shortage, notably in areas such as dispersed populations or small populations, Indigenous populations. In this setting, horizontal specialisations, that is knowledge across specialist disciplines, is essential to provide adequate care. So it wasn't really surprising looking back that JCU was to become the hub for thinking about horizontal specialisation and the co-invention of concepts such as rural generalism. Rural generalism has become a policy direction that is part of government thinking these days at the state and federal level and in many countries. It's had a noticeable impact globally, particularly Japan and Canada. The One Health Joint Plan of Action on the slide was created to respond to a range of these problems. What tipped it was the need to respond to international requests to prevent future zoonotic pandemics and to promote health sustainability through a One Health approach. And so a grouping of 4 international agencies who call themselves the quadripartite have developed the One Health Joint Plan of Action 2022 to 2026. This one. It's made up of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN, the World Organization for Animal Health, OIE, the United Nations Environmental Programme, UNEP, and the World Health Organization. And they have committed together to drive the change required to mitigate the impact of health challenges at the human-animal-plant environment interface at global, regional, and country levels. And that's their words. A significant hurdle, however, has been the difficulty of coming up with an agreed definition of the term One Health. There are lots of disciplines involved and lots of sciences, and finding a definition amongst them has been very difficult. And if one follows the development to the 1H JPA, some of their definitions are staggering and are so all-encompassing, it's hard to see how you could ever apply it. And thinking back again to the health sector, they remind me of the definition of health that was developed at Alma Ata in 1978, that some cynics have said humans only experience in the minute or two before orgasm and the minute or so after it. Action Track 1, enhancing One Health capacities to strengthen health systems. So here we have things like workforce, linking information and surveillance systems in wildlife to humans, for instance. Reflected in the work at JCU, the Atufi program, the Timor-Leste, the Mpumalanga activities, the discussions veterinary science and medicine had about a biosecurity workforce with a combined degree some 10 years ago. Action track 2, reducing the risks from emerging and re-emerging zoonotic epidemics and pandemics. Rick talked about this all the time. Chytrid, he's famous for that, we'll go back to that. SARS, COVID-19, bird flus, pig flus, polio, a huge proportion of new infectious disease in humans are animal in origin, about 80% of them. Action track 3, controlling and eliminating endemic, zoonotic, neglected tropical and vector-borne diseases. That could include dengue, malaria, strongyloiditis, TB, hookworm, scabies. The last 3 are less relevant to our traditional work. Food safety risks, the antimicrobial resistance, which we've tried to get into, but weren't that successful. And integrating the environment into One Health is really mostly a government thing. So all of these, certainly in the first 3 tracks, are very relevant to JCU's domains of academic interest in the life sciences. I'm only going to go to 2 of them, so you can breathe a sigh of relief. Lymphatic filariasis and the neglected tropical diseases. In the early development of public health and tropical medicine in the early 1990s, there was a very lively discussion about potential areas of competitive advantage in tropical health. We had a discussion about not being ready to compete yet in TB, malaria, or HIV. And Rick led a discussion to target neglected tropical diseases, and in particular lymphatic filariasis. LF is a very significant cause of morbidity globally, important in the West Pacific and Asia, and significantly neglected. It's caused by a mosquito-transmitted helminth, and the parasite, mostly Wucheria bancrofti in the Pacific. It's also an important problem globally. There are other filariasis, Brugia, they're both Brugia malay and Brugia timori. I notice Wayne Melrose is there, and he'll correct me if I don't say something like that. I think I'm quoting him when I say globally LF has about 160 million cases a year. About 40 million of people live with chronic effects of it, making it the second leading cause of disability globally, probably just following mental illness. There's widespread social stigma and oppressive psychological issues faced by people living with disability from the disease. Australia and Japan succeeded in interrupting lymphatic filariasis transmission by the 1970s. I remember in the 1990s talking with an older physician, some might recall Robert Douglas or Bob Douglas at TGH. He spoke about working at TGH in the 1930s as a resident or registrar or something. And he said that 30% of the inpatients had filariasis when you checked by night bleeding. Well, that's amazing. A few of you probably recall that the last homegrown cases of malaria in Australia still occurred in the 1960s when it finally petered out. We tend to forget how tropical Northern Australia actually is. Sometimes tropical is used interchangeably with development. Find that in Singapore, where once you talk about tropical, they often say, well, we were tropical once, but now we're modern. In relation to LF, there hadn't been a global coordinated effort. This is a lady with quite extreme elephantiasis in Papua New Guinea. So this is a real picture. Then in 1993, the International Task Force for Disease Eradication identified lymphatic filariasis as one of only 6 eradicable or potentially eradicable diseases. And so LF's profile became much increased. In May 1997, the World Health Assembly urged member states to strengthen LF as a public health problem. And actually, many of the Pacific Island countries and territories took this up. In JCU's vet school, people like Bruce Copeman had worked on antigen-based tests for the parasites like filariasis in cattle. And Rod Campbell had looked at treatments for parasites of goats and cattle using a drug called ivermectin. Global players in lymphatic filariasis like Eric Otteson, then at WHO, and Bernard Leese, then at World Bank, were looking for partners to take up the LF in the Pacific challenge. And people like Rick, Bruce, Rod, Campbell, and others could help make a case that JCU would be a very good partner. In 1996, the ACTM, Australian College of Tropical Medicine, which was launched at JCU in 1991. So the ACTM, JCU, and WHO sponsored an LF meeting in Bali with a follow-up meeting in Townsville on Magnetic Island in July 1997, coinciding with the official opening of the JCU WHO Collaboration Centre on the control of lymphatic filariasis. I mean, getting that title took months of arguing. And that's a young Peter Leggett, a Marcia Croucher, and a Rick Speare. In March 1999, the Secretariat of the South Pacific Community, in coordination with the WHO Pacific Ministers of Health meeting, agreed to coordinate a plan to eliminate lymphatic filariasis in their countries. In June 1999, a Brisbane meeting was held by Pacific public health leaders, along with reps from UQ and JCU, which surprised them, Smith Klein Beecham, and AMRAD ICT. There was some pushback about JCU's invitation, if I recall. Thus, the world's first regional lymphatic filariasis control strategy was launched. JCU was a key partner, and it was called PACALF. This cemented connections with World Bank and WHO. Bernard Leese, Eric Otteson, David Addis, amongst others. Placer Dome, the mining company, and their entity Placer Pacific in the Pacific, anchored the world chemical industry's body into backing the elimination at the global level. Placer Dome were keen to improve the health of their workers and villagers in their mining camps, notably at Misama in Papua New Guinea. So the program to eliminate LF, the global program to eliminate LF, started in 2000. After implementation of large mass drug administration campaigns and to a less extent vector control, in 2015, only 10 oceanic countries and territories were still considered to have ongoing transmission. Backing up a bit, it's of relevance that JCU veterinary scientists had worked on tests for related organisms in cattle, goats, and other animals, and treatments. They'd also worked on treatments for Onchocerca. So for those who aren't aware, the diagnosis of lymphatic filariasis used to require midnight blood sampling in communities. You'd have to wake up the entire community and wake them up around midnight, because that's when the microfilarial worms, microfilarial larvae, were circulating in the human blood system. And they weren't there during the day. So Copeman at the vet school and others had developed an antigen test that didn't need to be taken at a specific time of day, because it was the antigen, not the filarial larvae. That revolutionised diagnosis, and therefore revolutionised the approach to lymphatic filariasis worldwide. This is the starting position for the Pacific Island countries at ground zero. Now, the expanding scope of JCU's activities and recognised capacity in the neglected tropical disease and vector-borne disease space is nicely illustrated by what WHO has agreed for the designation of JCU's World Health Organization Coordinating Centre within Public Health and Tropical Medicine's academic unit. Right? You just don't write in and they give you whatever you want. There's a long argument. So it started with, so I think there's quite deep insights into what happened in public health and tropical medicine pretty quickly. It started with the WHO Collaboration Centre for elimination of lymphatic filariasis, and that was designated in 1997. It then expanded to the WHO CC for lymphatic filariasis and soil-transmitted helminths, which Rick was always on about, and then neglected tropical diseases was added to the title. And then in 2016, the WHO Collaboration Centre at JCU in Public Health and Tropical Medicine became the WHO CC for vector-borne and neglected tropical diseases, which is a huge scope. So Wayne Melrose, Paul Turner, Jeff Warner, Peter Leggett, and of course Rick were names that came from JCU. And then in the next wave came Trish Graves, Alex Lucas. Around the same time as that redesignation occurred, the School of Nursing received designation for a WHO Collaboration Centre for Nursing and Midwifery relating to emergency research. So that was catching on. So activity in the vector-borne diseases now included malaria and then TB. And that expanded with the arrival of Louis Schofield, Tom Burkett, Scott Ritchie, Maxine Whitaker, Denise Doolan, Andreas Kups. In infectious diseases, there was John McBride, who actually did his PhD here at JCU on the dengue outbreak in Townsville in 1993. And Emma McBride, who's come in the last wave as an infectious disease physician. I apologise if I've left people out, but I tried not to, but old brain. JCU became a critical part of the explosion of activity, including basic and applied research arising in the 1990s around neglected tropical diseases. A much better understanding of the immunologic basis of infection and pathogenesis of filarial disease emerged, including the strange nature of elephantiasis, which appeared to be more due to secondary infection, due to fungus and bacterial infections, than actually due to the filarial worm themselves. The year 2000, and red is endemic, green is non-endemic in the Pacific Island countries for LF. So annual mass drug treatment with DEC, ivermectin, albendazole has proven very effective in destroying microfilaria and interrupting transmission. Just compare these two. According to Graves, of the 33 countries in Oceania, included in her review in 2016, 24 were found to be endemic for the disease at some time in the past, and 18 of these were classified as endemic at the start of the global program to eliminate LF in the year 2000. So I'll just go back. 2000, 2017. After the implementation of the large mass drug administration campaigns, and to a lesser extent, vector control, only 10 oceanic countries were still considered to have ongoing transmission of LF in 2015. Chytrid, the frog-killing fungus. Rick loved frogs. He was obsessed with frogs. I can recall Rick accosting me in the corridors of the old Anton Brinals in the 1990s, very concerned about the dying off of several frog species in the wild. I think I might have shrugged. The importance of the observation of the declining frog and probably amphibian populations in Australia largely escaped me. He pointed out that the frog population's declines weren't only occurring in Australia, but were occurring in many parts of the world and had probably spread to Australia. He pointed out that the declining frog populations, very severe in some years, was a proxy variable for environmental decline and was very important as a measure of Australian and global ecosystems. He spent a great deal of time examining dead frogs and had caught and was observing some of the frog species at the Anton Brinal Centre in his office. Am I allowed to tell the story? So Rick had a big office downstairs at the Anton Brinal Centre, and it was like Peter Leggett's office. There was books and paper everywhere, and it was near the stairs. And one night, Graceland was working on a Master of Science in Public Health, was working in Rick Speare's office late at night. So this is the old centre, the National Trust building. So students and staff regularly felt that this was a really spooky building. It was dark. There were many nooks and crannies, and the doors creaked when the pressures changed within the buildings. Like at about 9 or 10 at night, the pressures changed and the doors went. So if you're more spiritually inclined, many thought it was inhabited by ghosts, which, given the history of the building going back to 1910, was plausible enough if you're inclined to that belief system. So a number of our students stopped coming because remember the photocopy machine was under the stairs and you could hear the Buddha, and so people stopped. But people were working at the Anton Brinal Centre, to 10 o'clock at night, every night. One night, Graceland was working on her project and, like you do, fell asleep. And probably half awake, he is rustling and creaking and falls back to sleep. So the rustling and creaking didn't really go away. So her heart raced a bit and the rustling became more obvious. And she tried to focus on her work when suddenly a package jumped out of the rubble and landed on her desk, scaring the hell out of her. Having a closer look, she saw it was one of Rick's frog specimens in a plastic bags made out of see-through plastic with holes in it so the frog could breathe. And then it decided to leap around the room. I won't go on to say what Graceland said had happened to her following that. But experiences like this at the Anton Brinal Centre were not unknown. Of course, since the ABC has relocated to JCU, there's so many more new rules, nothing like that would ever happen. Rick was very determined to follow and try to unravel the reason for frog number declines. So he began to bring together researchers who were keen on studying the issue. One of these was Lee Berger, then a PhD student, who in 1998 finally discovered that a chytrid fungus that attacked keratin on frog skin was the causative agent for the frog's decline. It turned out that skin is critical in maintaining frog homeostasis, and an inability to maintain homeostasis ultimately results in heart failure and then the frog's death. For her work, Lee was awarded the Frank Fenner Prize for Life Scientist of the Year in 2018 by the Prime Minister. The work has now moved on to find mechanisms to manage the disease and how to conserve amphibian biodiversity. Interestingly, it's being postulated that collapsing populations of amphibians has resulted in large rises in mosquito populations, at least in Costa Rica and Panama, and subsequently very large increases in malarial cases there. So, plausible. Life cycle. So I'm not talking about everything Rick did. I'm not going to talk about Strongyloides, including his big campaign in Arnhem Land and the Northern Territory. The whole of the Northern Territory seemed to be chasing after Strongyloides. He was very interested in Strongyloides as a measure of immunocompromise in humans. I'm not talking about the dengue outbreaks in North Queensland. There was a huge one in 1992 when we got there. Thousands of cases. It's where John McBride did his PhD. Subsequently, it was ultimately brought under control by another JCU person called Scott Ritchie, who, along with Scott O'Connell from UQ at the time, developed a bacteria, or found a bacteria, that when you infected Aedes aegypti, the carrying mosquito, with Wolbachia, Aedes aegypti couldn't transmit dengue. There was a trial carried. The Gates Foundation gave us the facilities in Cairns, where Scott Ritchie kindly got students to get bitten by mosquitoes to see what happened. He had bites, and it turned out that those mosquitoes, the faster you rid, mosquitoes loved it more. And the younger graduate students just loved it. Anyway, so did the mosquitoes. So anyway, so that was a Gates facility. There was a controlled trial in some suburbs of Cairns and not others. The suburbs of Cairns, where Wolbachia was released, had insignificant numbers of dengue, and the other suburbs had shitloads of dengue. And then the following year or two, Townsville, all of Townsville, was bombarded with Wolbachia infected Aedes aegypti. And that's why you don't have outbreaks every year. It's been used to bombard cities in Latin America to try to stop outbreaks. He loved head lice. He gave himself head lice. It's alleged that he paid his children to be given head lice. So you don't have to say yes or no. I know it's true, he told me. So he could test the drugs to kill them. He was really interested in scabies and worked on it in the Northern Territory. He was really interested in hookworms, and he swallowed this Israeli camera, and that took pictures all the way down. And you infected yourself with hookworms, and then you took pictures of yourself. Then you fished the camera out of your feces before you flushed it. So that's Rick. That's Rick having refounded. And this is Rick infecting himself with hookworms. So he definitely had an interest in auto-infection, occasionally using his family members as well, though he did pay them, apparently. But I did want, before I end, I did want to say a couple of things about capacity building, because Rick really believed in it. And in some ways, I've opened with capacity building. It really was a fundamental part of his approach to research and education. Two examples. A TUFI. And Dave McLaren, James Orgeni, Michelle Redmond McLaren have been working on it since the project was first established in 2009. He was really trying to understand how to improve the health of people and animals. And in recent years, 12 years ago, he was central to establishing the Atufi Health Research Group in the Solomon Islands. So I'm quoting David McLaren here. This group brings together people from community, health services, research institutes, universities, and professional organisations in a remote provincial setting that face numerous health challenges. The Atufi Health Research Group is committed to train and support a generation of young Pacific Island health professionals and researchers to investigate local health issues and to create locally appropriate solutions. The group, the location of Atufi is at Atufi Hospital on the east side of Malaita Island, and the only way you can get there is to walk through rainforest trails, canoe, boat or light aircraft. Services about 30,000 people, so it's not easy. So the program uses a learn by doing approach to build research capacity by embedding research activity into health service and community level health projects that are prioritised by local communities and the health service. The group is eclectic in nature and made up of community leaders. Solomon Islander health professionals and international researchers included. All prioritise participatory processes and respect multiple ways of knowing. From this philosophical base, the group contributes to the collective discovery of new knowledge about local health issues to inform local ways to address health issues. And it's been going since 2009. Certainly the Redmonds have been there ever since. Building Indigenous research capacity, Burke. So we had, once the Master of Public Health and Tropical Medicine program had taken off, we were wondering about how a block approach to, say, research training would work. And we're pretty cautious about it. And we're wondering how that might work with disparate people who might come together from time to time and then go back, being supported online. So the Building Indigenous Research Capacity, of which this is a picture of the participants, it had the goals of supporting emerging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community and academic leaders to develop their careers in research and health, and to develop partnerships with Indigenous community-controlled health services. Its aim was to build capacity of a cohort of Indigenous researchers, largely based in Northern Australia, and build capacity in 3 community-controlled health services, involving them in Indigenous and population health research. The project really investigated models of how universities can best build research capacity in Indigenous populations. The NHMRC funded the Burke program to the tune of 2.4 million. And the grant was awarded to Jacinta Elston, Rick Speare, Richard Murray, Comlotse and Craig Veach. If you have a look at this picture, there's the younger Richard Murray, the Jenny Judd, who was the postgrad fellow who kept everyone in tune, the Rick Speare. But so I'll go through this, but about I'll get to it. In some ways, it was a trial run for the principles for the cohort doctoral program, which followed about 2 or 3 years later. And that currently has 120 research students involved. It has had 160, and it aimed to build research capacity and qualifications of clinical professions. So both Burke and the cohort doctoral program build pathways for research study, learning from the experience gained from the block mode programs of the MPH and TM. Quoting Professor Jacinta Elston, the NHMRC funding help to provide the resources to create a space to share experiences, develop and discuss areas of interest, and build a sense of community, as well as allowing us to foster emerging Indigenous researchers into the research community. Just have a look at the people involved. Over the past decade, the Burke cohort of participants acquired tertiary qualifications that include 1 undergraduate degree, 17 postgraduate degrees. The project has resulted in at least 3 professorships, 2 associate professorships, and numerous leaderships of research centres, grants and programs. Across the life of the project, Indigenous research participants also dramatically increased their publication rates. That is quite extraordinary. So we're now in a world where the key domains where public health tropical medicine has built its reputation is on most people's lips. Outbreaks seem everywhere. The world is seemingly near the end of the COVID outbreak, which would have to have been one of the most socially and financially disruptive outbreaks for a long time. Humans are making more demands on the environment. We are pushing into lots of ecosystems and coming into contact with organisms that large populations haven't been exposed to before. Global travel, global trade and urbanisation, along with changing temperature patterns and rainfall, seems a likely explanation. Scientists are also looking much harder. In the last 20 years, it's estimated that 80% of new infectious diseases in humans are jumping from other animal species. There do appear to be credible global mechanisms developing for early warning, surveillance mitigation, and the control of new pathogen outbreaks. The One Health global effort does speak to that. There is also national talk in Australia about establishing a Centres for Disease Control. So what role does North Queensland play in that? CSIRO has been tasked with projecting what are the likely virus groups of most pandemic risk in Australia. The Office of Health Security, run by Steph Williams, who happens to have trained here as well, has now launched a set of One Health scholarships for the ASEAN countries. So there is movement. Within our ranks, there's also deep links with Indigenous communities built over several decades. And it puts the JCU cluster of disciplines in a great position to take a serious role in closing the gap initiatives forward, something Rick deeply identified with. We should also reflect on JCU's deep links with the Pacific and our near neighbours. At the very least, public health tropical medicine, the medical school, nursing and vet sciences all have long histories of significant involvement in the region, but not in any organised way. Rick has certainly left an indelible impact on the set of rails public health and tropical medicine and One Health at JCU is travelling on. One can see his fingerprints all over the strategic direction and culture of the place. He had a stunning ability to generate respect and trust from his colleagues, as well as his students, using his capacity to make serious issues graphic without being threatening. We all feel the massive gap. Thank you. Just acknowledging some of the people whose stuff I stole. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ian, for that journey, I think, through the history, the development of medicine, health sciences, vet sciences public health here at JCU. And I'm sure you reminded a great many people in the audience of the journeys they've been on, and no doubt you've embarrassed a few with pictures from their youth. And of course, you gave a great, I think you wove into that a great, you wove through the influence of Professor Speare on both this region, Australia more generally, our nearest neighbours in the Pacific, and of course, well beyond that, through the work that he inspired here in Townsville and with JCU. So thank you, Ian, for your continuing advocacy on the issues of public health, a sustainable health workforce, the development of those workforces, and of course, your contribution here this evening in delivering the inaugural Rick Speare Oration. I'd like to thank once again all of our distinguished guests, and especially Gracelyn for delivering the Welcome to Country. And thank you all for spending time here with us, and some of you traveling from interstate to be with us this evening. And of course, those people who joined us online. It's been a privilege to be here this evening, and I hope you'll join me once more in thanking Ian for his presentation. For those who'd like to reminisce or quiz Ian, we have the opportunity. You have the opportunity to have a few more refreshments before you leave. Thank you all for coming along, and I sincerely hope you enjoyed tonight's oration. Thank you.